Welcome to Austin Liti Limits, a series where authors talk to authors about books and writing. I'm Scott Simmergren.
And I'm Larry Brill. You know, Scott and I have had our share of successes.
And awards.
His last novel, To Squeeze a Prairie Dog, won 3 book awards. His latest novel, The Benevolent Lords of Sometimes Island, has been getting great reviews.
Larry has won his share of awards too. His latest book is out now, The Printer and the Strumpet. Here at Austin Liti Limits, we're working with our good friends at Book People to introduce readers to our favorite authors.
Well, naturally, during these days of pandemic, we've had to move our author interviews online until the bookstore is up and running again 100%.
In this episode, I had a chance to chat with 2019 Indie Author of the Year, Ran Walker.
Ran Walker grew up in West Point, Mississippi, also the home of the blues great Howlin' Wolf. As a boy, Ran had the distinction of being the first Black Eagle Scout in Clay County. He is an assistant professor of English and creative writing at Hampton University. Ran is the author of 21 books, from microfiction to novels.
How you doing, Ran?
Doing great. How are you doing, Scott?
Been all right. How have you been during the pandemic? The last time I saw you in person was a couple weeks before we would officially say the pandemic started, when we were in Nashville, Tennessee.
Right.
How have you been since then?
You know, ups and downs, mostly ups. Been able to do some writing during this time and spend a lot of time with my family. So it's been actually pretty cool.
Yeah, I think,
I mean, if you don't think about the fact that there's stuff going on out there in the world, it's cool.
Right. You've been pretty, I guess, prolific during the pandemic.
Yeah, it's, I was stuck for a while where I couldn't write anything. And my wife just kept telling me, find your way back in, you know, find something that you can write about. And I thought back, my earlier books were romantic comedies, interestingly enough. And I decided, let me try this microfiction thing that I'm doing now and I apply it to that. And it turned into a book called Bees and Things and Flowers. And from there, I ended up writing another 5 books. I mean, I've written 5 books this year and 1 at the end of last year. So it's been a very productive quarantine, I guess you could say.
So let me ask you this: why split them up in the separate books when it could be a large volume? Is there a particular reason for keeping them shorter?
Okay, so that's actually a good question. When I think about my collections, I think about them the same way that poets might think about their collections. And so the first book that I released, that was microfiction, was actually a collection of 50-word stories, 100 of them, called The Strange Museum. So the concept of The Strange Museum was its own theme, and that's why they became their own book. With Bees and Things and Flowers, although they were microfiction pieces, they all told the same story. It was a boy meets a girl, summer internship in New York City. You know, it was a story, more like a concept album. And so that was a standalone with The World Is Yours. The World Is Yours was my collection of random pieces that I put together. And then after that, the book I did was called Can I Kick It?, which is a collection of sneaker, microfiction, and poetry. Mm-hmm. So all of the stories were specifically about sneaker culture. So just thematically, they haven't really meshed to where all of them could be in the same book. But, you know, in the future, who knows? Mm-hmm. You know, they could possibly be put together later on.
Right, like an anthology. Right, I do have The World Is Yours. I did read this book, enjoyed it very much. And appreciated the hip hop references. Since this was my introduction to microfiction, why don't you define it for us, for the audience?
Okay. You're probably going to see a lot of different definitions on the internet, but the basic one that we all agree upon, the common denominator would be that the story, a work of fiction, is 300 words or less. The entire story is 300 words or less. I prefer stories that are much shorter than that. In fact, I write what are called dribbles and drabbles. A dribble is a 50-word story, and a drabble is a 100-word story. So my stories are either 50 words or 100 words or somewhere in between or possibly slightly over, but it never gets to 300 words.
Right. So in private, we had discussed some of this a little bit, and we discussed the similarities between microfiction and prose poetry. So what would be the difference between a prose poet who doesn't use rhyme and meter? They're writing like deconstructing sentences, and then someone that writes microfiction, is it the type of narrator? Is it the fact that maybe you use paragraphs as structure? What's the difference?
That's a really good question. There's a lot of debate as to what the difference is. Most people admit that there's a fine line at times between the two. But to me, the microfiction piece is going to have more of an emphasis on narrative structure. Like there's a story that's being told or implied. Whereas with prose poetry, you basically have a poem that's presented to you in a prose shape. So the emphasis is going to be on those things that are unique to poetry, like rhythm and assonance and alliteration and allusion and those types of things, without necessarily a focus on narrative.
Right.
So if something actually happens, that is more of a microfiction piece, and something is more like a scene, a snapshot, a feeling, or an emotional vignette, then that to me is more poetic.
Right. Yeah. One of the things that I really enjoyed about your book, besides the fact that it was entertaining, was I kept thinking, and I did this for a couple of weeks because I read the book 3 times, was what constitutes a story? I kept going back and rethinking that over because, of course, I've been writing novels for the past 4 or 5 years, or novellas. And I was thinking, how do you get the narrative arc of those things down into microfiction? And believe it or not, some of your stories actually accomplish that, because within a couple paragraphs, you may be talking about a character as his younger self, and then as their older self, or maybe as their older self and they're reflecting back on their life. And there is that real quick arc there. And I really appreciated that. Is that something you try to accomplish all the time, or what are your goals when you sit down to try to write a microfiction piece?
A lot of it has to do with um, exploring an idea as best I can. And I'm going to kind of go back to this whole microfiction thing. I think a lot of times when people talk about microfiction, they think of it as like a miniature version of a story. And it's really something altogether different. So you can have a story that's 1,500 words and keep cutting words until you get to 100, but that doesn't necessarily mean you're going to have a very good story. So I try to get people to think about it a little bit differently. Don't think about it as a poem. Don't think about it as a song. Don't think about it as a short or a synopsis of a story or of a novel. Think about it in reverse. In fact, there's this apocryphal story that's often attributed to Hemingway, and it's the For Sale, Baby Shoes, Never Worn. 6 words. What can be extracted from that? There's another story about Augusto Monterosso. It's called The Dinosaur. Have you heard that one?
Mm-mm.
The whole of it is 7, or well, actually 8 words, depending upon the translation. But it goes like this. This is the entire story. When they awoke, the dinosaur was still there. And if you think about it from that, to me, 50 words is a lot of words. 100 words is a lot of words, because I'm building from that skeleton,
Right.
not shaving down from this. So I'm actually building upward. So I have a different kind of approach to my writing.
Right. So you and I are both hip hop fans, so let's do something fun. Here's a classic album, Public Enemies. It takes a nation of millions to hold us back. Would a song like, or the lyrics of Black Steel in the Hour of Chaos, would it count as microfiction since it has a narrative thread through it?
You know what? All right. So thinking about that song, thinking about the persona that Chuck D takes on in the song and the escape and everything, it's definitely a story. When I think about rap in general, I think of it as poetry. And I think of it as narrative poetry if there's a story that's being told in there.
Sure.
And it feels very clearly like it's a narrative poem, because I believe it's like a 4-verse song, isn't it? It goes on for a minute.
It is, and I don't really believe that there's a chorus. I mean,
Unless you count Flavor Flav yelling in the middle.
Right. There's some scratching with flavor that's repeated, but I don't believe that there's a chorus in it. And so that's why I was thinking, could this just qualify as microfiction?
All right. So like I said, I think the intent of the author will probably be a big part of that. And I don't think the economy of words is what he was thinking about or trying to reduce the story to its essence. Now, I do think it would be an excellent narrative poem. If you think about Slick Rick's children's story, again, another rap song with no chorus. I would still think of that as being more of a narrative poem than microfiction.
Right. Yeah, because there is a cadence and a lot of times alliteration in their work. So I guess, it would probably more qualify as something like a poem. I always think of like Ice-T, 6 in the morning. I mean, the way that song opens up, just that beginning seems like it could fit in your book. 6 in the morning, cops at my door, fresh Adidas squeak across the bathroom floor. That's a story right there.
It is. Yeah. It is.
And so you're such a huge hip hop fan. Do you listen to music while you write? And if you do, is there a go-to album that brings a mood for you?
Well, I do listen to music a lot when I write. I don't have a go-to album per se. I normally create Spotify playlists and everyone's on. In fact, you've seen some of the songs that inspired the pieces in The World Is Yours. But I have another book that I wrote called Afro Nerd in Love, where one of the chapters was inspired by the Beatles. Coming Together to me just has the weirdest lyrics ever. And it's just rich for using. I've done things with Prince. There's a singer, actually he's a bass player who sings. His name is Thundercat.
Yeah.
And he has a lyric in one of his songs called Where Would We Be If We Couldn't Tweet Our Thoughts? And that one lyric inspired a story that I used in the Portable Black Magic collection. So I'm always drawn off the music. In fact, it's difficult for me to write without a soundtrack.
Yeah, that's an interesting line from Thundercat, because in my recent book, The Benevolent Lords of Sometimes Island, I was going back to a time when there wasn't something like Twitter, and there is still life without it. It's just different.
We lived through that. Probably both latchkey kids too. That's
right. Yeah, we did live through that. So you were the 2019 Indie Author of the Year. Does an award provide an affirmation for you for your writing?
Short answer, yes. Writing is a very lonely thing. You can do all this writing, think that you have the best ideas in the world, and then you put them out there in the world, and it's like sometimes people don't even care. I mean, there's so many other things to be concerned with. As writers, we have to consider whether somebody would rather binge watch The Queen's Gambit or read our stories. So, it's that competition, and you just feel like sometimes you're just a person who's just adding your art into an empty pit or a bottomless pit. And it's nice that when you put something out there in the world, people say, you know what? We respect the fact that you've taken the time to learn this craft. We think that what you're doing is good. And, I can easily try to lie to you and say that kind of stuff doesn't matter. Like, I'm going to write whatever, and I would continue writing in whatever shape, form, fashion, regardless if I got the validation or not. But it helps out tremendously. And it's encouraged me a great deal. And if anything, it means when I sit down, I'm not just spinning my wheels.
Right. There is an aspect to writing, though, because I agree with you. The awards that I've received have been fantastic, but there also is an aspect of the writing part that I just enjoy the work of it. That creative space you get into when there's nobody else around and you're doing it, and you're in that creative part of your brain's kind of kicking off, and I love that part, and I always get reminded that that is my favorite part, though, of the writing. But you are correct from the standpoint of when you're looking for readers, sometimes it can be difficult when it seems like you're just hearing crickets out there. So this is the time in the show where we do the lightning round. It is 10 quick questions. It's a concept that we stole from inside the Actors Studio, but it's not their concept. They stole it from Marcel Proust. He stole it from Bernard Pivot. A lot of people have used this format. We have our own format for Austin Lady Limits. So Rand Walker, are you ready for the lightning round?
I'm ready.
Waiting for the drum roll. What's your favorite word?
My favorite word is Schadenfreude.
Oh, great. What's your least favorite word?
Aspiring.
Oh, really? What turned you on?
A good dark tale that has an earned twist that keeps me off guard.
What turned you off?
People who create art and don't study it first.
What is your idea of happiness?
My idea of happiness is being with my family, having a good book to read, and writing without having to worry about what's going to happen to it after the fact.
Excellent. Who is your favorite author?
Don't really have one, but I do draw off of a lot of different people. Like I love the mystery and complexity of Toni Morrison. I love the dark, twisted mind of Roald Dahl. I love the poetic and tension-filled language of Colin Channer. The wild, unorthodox approach to writing that the Argentine writer Cesar Ira uses. So I just draw from a group of different people, but I don't have one single person. But if I were to try to find one single person, I think the person who probably comes the closest to being my absolute favorite would be Ralph Ellison.
Right. Yeah, it's like asking, what's your favorite album? That's a tough one.
Your favorite kid, right?
Yeah, right. If you could be a character from a well-known novel, anytime in history, who would it be?
All right, writer to writer here. I don't really like the idea of being any character because we heap conflict on characters, and I hate conflict. But if I had to pick somebody, and I'm not trying to be controversial here because I've given it some thought. If I had to be a character, I probably want to be Charlie Bucket from Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. But let me explain why, though.
Mm-hmm.
If I were Charlie, that's the best chance that the Oompa Loompas ever have of being liberated. Just being honest.
Charlie's coming in for a
revolt. They'd still be enslaved.
All
Give
right.
them chocolate and a place to live. Okay.
What other profession other than your own would you want to attempt?
I'd love to be a filmmaker.
Right. What profession would you least want to do?
I would hate to work at a slaughterhouse.
Yeah, that's terrible. Okay, last question. If heaven exists, what would you like to hear God say when you reach the check-in desk?
If heaven exists, what would I like to hear God say when I reach the check-in desk? You know what, Rand? Your daughter's doing amazing things down there, changing the world.
Excellent. Rand Walker, thank you very much for being on our show, and good luck to you.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it, Scott.